The bread and butter train keeps on rolling. We all know how well the Filth did, and now it's time to introduce the Loco. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. Bread and butter are swinging for the fences with the Loco. You take one look at it and you can tell it's eerily similar to a couple of other paddles. It looks nearly identical to the uber popular Vatic Pro Flashes and 6-0 double black diamonds, so as you can imagine, if it's going to break that duopoly, it better be good. We're going to talk about just how good it is here in a second, but before any of that, remember that if you do want to check out the Loco, you can visit us on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So the Bread and Butter Loco, let's talk about some specs. It weighs between 7.7 and 7.9 ounces. It has a 5.3 inch handle with a 16 millimeter core, and of course it has that 16.3 inch hybrid length. Now like the Filth, the Loco has the same T700 carbon top sheet, no blended Kevlar weave here yet, and of course this is a thermoformed unibody constructed paddle, so we kind of already know what that means for playability. Although, do we? One of the major surprises I had with the Loco was just how soft and controlled it was, so that's where we're going to start the review. With the thermoformed unibody construction and the fact that it looks so similar to the Flash and double black diamond, you would think the Loco would play very similarly to those in that it's kind of power before anything else. Well, literally on my first few ground strokes, I couldn't believe how soft this paddle felt. I was actually a bit discombobulated and was trying to figure out if it was due to the cold or something else, so I grabbed the DBD and Flash to compare. Sure enough, the Loco is significantly softer than either of those two paddles. Now that's pretty crazy, especially considering the fact the DBD is already noticeably softer than the Flash, but the difference between the DBD and the Loco is even more noticeable. Ranking those three in terms of stiffness, I would give the Flash a 9.5, the DBD an 8.5, and the Loco just a 6.5. For reference, I would give the non-thermoformed Prism Flash a 5 on that stiffness scale. For me, that 5 kind of just represents the baseline for stiffness, where anything over it would be considered stiff, and anything under it would be soft. So that means that the Loco is still stiffer than it is soft, which is to be expected for a thermoform paddle, but because it's so much softer than its competition, that begs the question, is this a better control paddle? Yes, that added softness means you simply have more time to control your touch shots, so dinks, resets, and drops. You just have more of that ability to cushion them into the kitchen during pocketing. Now for me personally, and I've said this before, but I do prefer the stiffer feel of paddles like the DBD and the Flash, even for touch shots, because that stiffer feel makes for an overall more responsive sensation. The Loco isn't necessarily muted like a Proline Energy, or for a more extreme example, a Vanguard 2.0, because it has a very raw feel, but combine raw with soft and you get a sort of hollow sensation. Because it's hollow, you don't have that same crisp entry and exit point with the ball on contact, which to me does take away a bit of feel, but people will still really like this because it does have better feel than muted paddles. Now I had to compare the Loco to the Filth because I was so surprised with how soft it was, and yes, this paddle is noticeably softer than any of the Filths. Those do have a similarly raw feel, but because they're so much stiffer, they're also much more responsive. Now the value I put on feel is one thing, but if we're talking purely objectively, the Filth is point blank better than those two hybrid competitors for control. It's also better than the Filth because no amount of feel can replicate that extra little split second of control that softer paddles give you. So naturally, because the Loco is softer, it's going to be better for control, but also worse for power. I noticed this most with big ground strokes and serves where I feel like I just didn't get that little extra zing that I get with the most powerful thermoform paddles. Again, this was mostly at the beginning of my playtest where I was almost taken aback by this lower power. That being said, in terms of power on shorter strokes and more reactive type shots like volleys, and yes, I'm talking about pop here, the power is less noticeably lower than on other thermoform paddles. I wouldn't go as far as to say the pop is on the same level as the DBD and Flash, but because these types of shots don't crush the ball as hard, you don't notice the drop off in power quite as much. I was still able to put away volleys like I would with any thermoform unibody paddle, so as you can imagine, combining that great pop with this hybrid shape, this is a volley specialist. Reactions can just be so much quicker with these hybrid paddles than they are with elongated ones, but then you don't have nearly as much a loss in leverage that you do with standard shaped paddles. So now that I've talked about how fast-paced power is low but pop is still high, does that mean the Loco is another one of those adaptive paddles like the Nova, Proline Energy, or the Forzas? Not really. Those are more noticeably adaptive, where it feels like that adaptivity is actively engineered into the playability. This feels more like a softer thermoform paddle that loses power because it's softer, but is still poppy because of the nature of thermoforming. It's not as unique as those other paddles, which is why I won't put it in the same tier of super cool playability, but it does have a bit of that hybridness to it. I also just wanted to say, this is still a power paddle. It's relatively less powerful than its direct competitors, but like I said with that stiffness index example earlier, it's still more powerful than it is not. To be honest, I prefer this more controllable power, especially from the baseline. I do value when a paddle helps me add a bit of zing to my shot, but not if it comes at the expense of control. The Loco strikes a really good balance between the two, where it's not weak by any means, but I also never found it to be uncontrollably powerful. Spin is an area where the Loco is extremely impressive. I was sort of worried at first because I usually think that power and spin scale linearly, so the fact that it was less powerful made me think it would also be less spin friendly, but that wasn't the case. There's that same super top end spin potential, and of course that same spin variety that I keep waxing lyrical about with this hybrid shape. For those of you who haven't heard my spiel about this, hybrid paddles are better for spin variety than elongated paddles because they allow you to hit with spin more easily and in more random situations. Elongated paddles have tons of spin if you have time to set up a full pace shot, but because hybrid paddles are quicker, you can flick them through contact with tons of racket head speed in those more random and sticky situations. And of course, these are significantly better for spin shots at the net, like roll volleys, again because they're so much more maneuverable. I just noticed this little feather thing on the paddle. Hopefully that wasn't there the whole time. So yes, spin is extremely high on the Loco, and because it's a little bit softer, it has more of that grabby type of spin. Stiffer thermoform paddles feel like they have a more instantaneous tennis-y type of spin, where there's a seamless transfer of energy from your stroke through the paddle and into the ball. This softer spin feels a bit more controllable because during contact, you can use that dwell time to almost load up on the amount of spin you want to end up putting out. Which style is more spin friendly is really neither here nor there, but I'm really starting to appreciate this more grabby type of spin because it makes for more control, and I do think it does make for more spin on slower, more finesse-y type of shots. This is one of the best spin paddles right now. I haven't tried the Ruby, but finally got my hands on one, so when the snow goes away in Vancouver, I'll definitely give that one a go. But for me, the Loco is definitely in the top 3 spin paddles right now. I actually think the Loco has a very important role in this industry because its playability lies somewhere between the double black diamonds, Vatic Pro flashes, and then the Vatic Pro Prism line. It's stiffer than the Prisms and softer than the other two, so if you want a control profile that's somewhere in the middle, this could be the perfect paddle for you. Now, as much as I like the Prisms, I actually think this level of control is better because it's noticeably softer than the DBD and Flash, but doesn't lose the same amount of power and spin that the Prisms do. Also, because it's thermoformed and unibody, it has much better feel than what you'll get with the Prism line, despite what I said about it being a little hollow. It's in the nature of thermoform paddles to have better feel because the unibody construction makes it so that there are no seams or cutoffs for the vibrations to be muted out. You do get that same amount of feedback all the way down the handle like you would on the Bread and Butter Filth. It's just, again, a little bit of a softer response. I think this is a paddle that a lot of people should look at because I know there was some pushback from the player base that found the original thermoform paddles too powerful, and if that's you, you should give this a go. I also think that because it's so light in stock form, it's a great platform paddle to customize up to a certain spec. You can make it more stable by adding weight to the handle and the throat, or you can make it perform a bit more like an elongated paddle by adding weight to the tip. You'll be giving it more leverage that way, but do keep in mind that this will obviously take away from its maneuverability. I'm really happy with this release. I was a little worried that it was just going to be a double black diamond and Flash copy and paste, but it's definitely not. I don't think I'll be switching because I always seem to go back to the safety blanket of an elongated paddle, but this was a great paddle to kick off my 2024. We do have some other awesome paddle reviews coming, so stay tuned. With that said, that is going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you do want to demo the Loco, you can come visit us in store, or you can check it out online at racketsandrunners.ca.